Off we go. So I was hitting my air drums there. Welcome, bienvenue. Welcome once again to IPSA Kind of Magic, a show dedicated to independent personal search agents. The IPSA organization, currently chaired by Hamish McClay, of which Jackie Dyson is a special envoy and a consultant, therefore, and also owns the Yorkshire Search Agency Limit. And we talk about topics that really affect searches, search agents, and the like going forward. And also we talk about also various aspects of property and how it relates to that. And dare I mention, a cheeky plug, that we have various other shows, including Property Matters on a Tuesday, IPSA Kind of Magic today on a Wednesday. On Thursday we have Property Quorum, and on Friday we have Cladding Matters. So there's all different aspects of property there to titillate the palate and hopefully provide you with a smile, more information, and some yet more critical thinking. But today, today's topic is quite simply this: IPSA Kind of Magic, one search, two uses. Would you explain what we mean by that, Hamish?
Oh, quite simply, over time, we are able to obtain data, or data, depends how one wants to actually sort of what one wants to call it. I don't know quite which is meant to be, and I can't remember which is the American one. You get tied up with all the.
I think data. I think data is the American one. Data is the English one.
Oh, we'll keep data because it sounds friendlier actually than data.
I think it sounds more grown up. But anyway, carry on.
Either way, there is an abundance of information, and in fact, in some cases, far too much of the darn stuff. However, whether a buyer or seller might be, there is a commonality. If you're selling your property, you need to put information together in order to interest the buyer. And if you're buying a property, you need that information. Some of it deeper than others, depending on the type of property you have. Now, what actually sort of happened, we sort of go back. And I mean, this is why it's quite interesting having Jackie with us today, because she will sort of help out. Because early days, when we say early days, let's go previous century. That sounds ages ago, doesn't it? The last century. Said that in the last century, it was a long time ago, particularly when we were nearing the end, because we were speaking about Victorian era. I don't know what era, the Elizabethan era. I guess we've actually sort of had from the sort of 50s right the way through. Yeah, so now we can speak about the Elizabethan era. That's got nothing to do with it. Sorry, I got sidetracked yet again. However,
the two era, because I was at the moment thinking of people with frocks and high collars and stuff like that. I don't think you meant that one. Nobody walking around with a ruff.
Oh, you were around then? No, sadly, I wasn't. I wasn't around then. The more recent Elizabeth. Fortunately, there's only two of them. Many people won't. I think the way they teach history these days, probably only will. People will remember the one. However,
I'm surprised the way they teach history today. They actually even know that there was another Elizabeth before this one. But anyway, moving on.
But what we've actually sort of found in this, because it's easy to obtain some data. We do have councils who still actually don't want to allow us to get at the data which they hold, which should be in the public domain. But some of it's very common. And what we have of course, we have this sort of fragmented, you can understand it. There is a challenge with a solicitor who is being responsible for the buyer and the seller. There does need to be, and they actually have created to make the situation that, okay, they do need to be separate. The buyer needs a solicitor and the seller needs a solicitor. And it's good. And it's only because humans are humans. So it's much safer that way to actually do it. However, there's a lot of information which is common to what we call the early information, the upfront information, material. It doesn't matter what the heck we call it. much of the information the buyer supplying, sorry, the supplier, the seller is supplying, is also information which we gather on behalf of the buyer ourselves. So, boy, what's the point we're speaking about this with things like anti-money laundering? There's a big argument. Why do we have so many people? Why does everybody have to do it with this person, with that person, with the next person? Now, isn't information, isn't data much the same sort of type of thing? But early days, it wasn't as easy to get the data. I mean, I think even the early departments, did they not, Jackie? Weren't they a little bit resistant about releasing the data?
Well, again, it's different from council to council. You get some that are extremely helpful, and then you get some that try and put barriers in front of you. I was very fortunate in the area I worked. Majority of them were very, very good. And like Kirklees, we were getting building regulations information even before it became a question on the CON 29R. And they were very good. They were very helpful. But yeah, fortunately, where I covered, they were all very, very good. We could get 99.9% of the information that we required. But obviously, as times have gone on over 38 years since I started in the business, things have changed. People have become more environmentally aware, so therefore questions were added. And the buyer now wants more information up front than they ever had before. Like you move in and you think, oh, the boiler's gone. When was it last serviced? Why didn't they tell me it hadn't been serviced? Why did they tell me? Things like that now that buyers want upfront information. And it's put the onus on the sellers to be more upfront. But also, so the councils, it all depends on your area as to where you are. I say I was always fortunate. West Yorkshire were always very good for supplying information. If I asked, I would usually get. Unfortunately, with working for the council, if someone said no, I'd challenge it because I knew I was allowed to look at that information. So it's knowing what information you can look at, even if the councils refuse to let you have it. So it depends area to area, I suppose.
Now, this is one of the interesting aspects, and it is a shame. It's part of this is one of the challenging things for Land Registry, who of course are trying to piece together all of the land charges information for all the different councils, and they all work different ways. And one of the hardest aspects can be, building regulations is a tough one, because that's not necessarily readily available, because from a legal perspective, that wasn't added into the mix for some time later, although it should still be within the public domain. It should still be in a publicly accessible register. However, one of the challenges that the councils had initially was to say, well, there is some personal information here that could be attached to the building regulations, and because of that personal information, they did need to sift through it and make sure that you weren't collecting information about people. I think that was one of the challenges, and therefore a lot of people didn't bother making this stuff available. But it was only in the last 6 years that Corby actually allowed us to getting building regulation information without having to send them a check. And
really,
it was just absolutely absurd. I just couldn't believe it. And there's strange ways and strange people. But it just going back to what we were sort of saying, that particular type of information that Jackie just came with, it can be important to somebody who wants to buy into a property. Now we're hearing, and this is one of the things that we were actually sort of speaking about yesterday, that the forward-looking, what actually the regulations are coming in relative to the types of energy that's being used and the way it's being used. Gas, they want to get rid of completely. So a lot of people are want to know right up front now, but what is material, what is important information? Is the gas Is there still gas within the property? Or do they have this sort of heat pump sort of type of scenario that we can't meet the demand for? But there is information that needs to go to the buyer right at the very, very start. Some of that information is contained within the local authority searches that we carry out. And it is possible now with the software that there is that can put together the information that the buyer has, the information that the local authority has, and put it together in one very significant report that will give information for the conveyancer who's carrying out the work, and also putting everything together there. And we had a significant amount of input, I think, from one of our team when we was working on the property quorum last week.
Right, yes.
If you're working in this particular type of environment, the estate agent wants to use kind of pretty words, selling sort of type words. You can have a section which is what the lovely picturesque, if you like, scene that the seller or those estate agents trying to create. You can have that. You can have the serious stuff. And then you can have the other aspects is when was the boiler last serviced? If they have a boiler, has it been replaced now by? Do they have a power point to actually charge up electrical vehicles? All sorts of things of this particular information. It could be in one very, very effective place within the actual information that we're gathering. And this is what we're actually sort of saying. This could be very, very helpful and can save an awful lot of time.
Right.
I mean, we're very fortunate at IPSA now that because of the work that's been carried out with one of our great partners who have enabled us to access this software, we can actually get an awful lot of that early information. Some of the information, like sort of Jackie was indicating, we can actually wait a little bit for, and building regs tends to be that, but we get a lot of information very, very early on, which is going to help that buyer, which is going to help that seller, which is going to help speed everything up.
So what, from your experience, Jackie, do you find that we are ever increasing amount of data, a good portion of which is not necessarily relevant, and it gets to the point where you can't see the wood for the trees?
I think so. I think sometimes people are asking for too much information. They want to know, but I think the conveyancers, they now have to cover their back so much because we live in you were saying about data and data, the American word. The Americans are a big culture for suing. And unfortunately, that has now come over here. We're adopting a lot of Americanisms that I don't particularly like because we were here first.
I think the old expression is when America gets a cold, we catch a fever. So it's kind of...
yeah. I mean, personally, upfront information is a very, very good thing, but you can get too much. With the house we lived in before this one now, when we moved in, the people that we bought from were very kind, and they gave us a folder which even had copies of the plans for the extension that were built, and it had the completion certificate in. And this was even before this information was asked for.
That's impressive.
And then what we added to it, so when we had a new gas fire put in, we put in the information. When it was serviced, we kept that information. So when we sold it 4 years ago, we just handed that folder straight over to the young purchasers. They were first-time buyers. They were expecting a baby. So as much information they had was extremely useful for them because they said they didn't have to go and find it. They didn't have to ask for it. It was already there. The one thing that is upfront information, which I feel is extremely irrelevant, and that is the damned EPC, Energy Performance Certificate. It is a waste of space, a waste of time, because to be honest, when we were looking at houses, I never even looked at the EPC to see if it had a D rating or a C rating and how much it would cost me to run it for a year, because that's guesstimate, because people that lived here before us were out at work all day. You know, they had 3 young children living at home, so everybody had a shower every day. So there was 5 showers going. There was all the washing. So the energy assessment was totally wrong compared to my husband and I, that, you know, we don't have a shower every day. We haven't got teenagers standing in the shower for 20 minutes at a time. So the EPC to me is not necessarily upfront information. There's things that are far more important. You know, has that extension got your completion certificate? Did it have building regulations approval if it needed it? This is there's a lot of information you don't need, and there's a lot of information that you do need. But sometimes you can look and think, oh my God, and you throw it away. And perhaps when the boiler needs service, you can think back, oh, when was it last serviced? Because that's the question you're asked. When was your boiler last serviced? Hang on a minute. So, you know, I think too much information is coming up front. But then, are we putting information that is not necessary? But the more you have, the more you know. There are more questions than answers, and if you've got many answers as you can, then, you know, but it always does say buyer beware. There's always something that could be hidden. People can tick a form and say fill it in, but they could lie.
So knowledge is power, but knowledge about what colour your sinks are doesn't really help you wash your hands any better. Hamish,
No.
Would you take us home, please?
Well, we've got a situation, of course, that we have access to information now. And we're in a position that we, as providers of a service as well as product, can actually support whatever it is our client demands. Whereas previously we had this relationship almost specifically with conveyancers, with the solicitor, we're now in a position that we can actually offer a much broader service to a wide range, anybody that's involved with the buying or the selling of a property. It could be the estate agent, it could be a buyer, it could be a seller. Any of these people, we can actually support what we're doing. And I think what it's given us as members of IPSA, because we are actually professional, because we've got the background, because we've got that initial training, we've got the relationship with the council where we get information, there is much, much more that we can actually sort of gather and present upon request. The last thing we want is an avalanche of information which is unnecessary, because the saddest thing, and Jackie indicated this earlier, if we give people too much information, particularly giving it to a solicitor, the solicitor has to read it. So you don't want them to have too much. So we do need to break down what the information is being sent, but we can. The great news is we're in a better position to be able to provide it. And with the advice being withdrawn that are initially available for estate agents, it does put IPSA members in a far better position to be able to support the estate agents as well in their field of trying to gather information, because we can get the forms for them. And like Jackie was intimating there, we can create electronic folders now, can't we?
Yeah.
So that information is available then. And that information is available to the buyer and the seller.
So it just goes to show information is king, but the right information is far worth more than all the information, as Jackie has demonstrated and Hamish has actually conveyed. And what I'd say is that an IPSA member is if they're a member of IPSA, they know the right sort of information to find you. Rather than everything, they'll find you the right relevant information so you can make the best decisions. Thank you so much, Hamish McLeod of Search Conveyor, of course, Jackie Dyson of the Yorkshire Search Agent. Thank you both. And to you out there, I think your first port of call, if you haven't already, if you're interested in either becoming a member of IPSA or if you're interested in finding more about IPSA, is to contact the independent personal search agents. And I'm sure that Heather or whoever it is will take you through exactly why IPSA is the right move for most businesses who are involved in conveyancing. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground Keep reaching for the stars and look after that mental health. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye.